Marco,
Sean.
sometimes pen and paper are the most important things to do business on.
I know it comes out a lot,
It does come
even
out.
when we talk
Even
about
napkins.
AI.
That's true. I can't tell you how many people I've heard have their best ideas at a dinner meeting, and they write that idea on a napkin, right? And that napkin's pretty safe. It's not going up in the clouds somewhere for somebody else to steal. But the point of me making that observation of backside of napkin innovations is that that's not for everything in business. There's a lot of stuff that is driven by technology, and with that, as you know, Marco, comes risk, especially in the legal world where it's not just corporate IP and secrets, but perhaps partnerships with other companies or legal actions that they have underway. There's just I won't even list all of them. The countless types of data that companies need to be aware of when it comes to the legal space. And we're going to talk about that today with James Jansen from Consilio. James, thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yep, the VP and global head of cyber response solutions at Consilio. Give us a view into who James is. Maybe some of the things you've worked on in the past and what you're up to now at Consilio.
Yeah, sure. I'm an attorney by background, and practiced very briefly and very early on in my career. Shifted into the e-discovery world, and spent the first, say, 15 years focusing really on data analytics review, sort of the convergence of technology into making those processes more efficient. And probably 4 or 5 years ago, after spending a lot of my time dealing with litigation and government investigations from the e-discovery side, had the opportunity through a couple of our clients to work on data incidents. Their clients had been impacted by data privacy incidents, and needed some workflows to solve those problems, to figure out who had been impacted and ultimately notify those folks. And it was something that we didn't have a practice for, but we had all the tools in-house to do that kind of stuff. We just needed to sort of pivot how we were approaching some of the workflows to be able to get to the information the client needed. And so, like a lot of things, we find ourselves shifting into areas that we maybe didn't anticipate, 2 years ago or 10 years ago or 15 years ago, but made the pivot about 5 years ago into the work that I'm doing now, and really haven't looked back since.
So sometimes in technology, things happen 5 minutes ago, not even 2 years ago, right? And so
Right.
a lot of times when we talk about culture changes in society, regulation, we always like, well, technology is way ahead. It's way faster. We're playing catch up with regulation and even integrating it in our educational system and all of that. So coming to where we are now and artificial intelligence and new technology, it seems like the legal system may be struggling a little bit to keep up with that. When you look back at regulation that were done, I don't know, this is a law from 1865 or something like that. Where are we standing with that? Are there changes in the industry?
Yeah, I think, every industry is kind of like society. You've got early adopters who want to just get in there and figure out how they can use the technology to improve their lives or improve their, how they do business. You've got, folks who maybe sit back a little bit and sort of test the waters. And then you've got folks that, maybe are a little bit more resistant to change. I think the legal space is probably very similar to that. It's a traditional, industry. And so, you have a tendency just to be a little bit more conservative in terms of, determining how you're going to, leverage technology that's coming, like you said, there's new technology all the time, right? And if we're just trying to, use everything that comes to us, it's going to be very challenging. And so I think what I've seen thus far is, law firms that are interested in leveraging a lot, new technology, and in this space this year and the last year, generative AI and is being thoughtful about how you can use that technology, because there are, with all the benefits, there are obviously caveats, and people want to understand the landscape holistically and make good decisions about the way they're choosing to use using the new technology that's coming out.
Yeah, I probably can't even count the number of conversations I've had where we're trying to understand the state of mind from the company perspective with respect to cybersecurity, and more pointedly, risk management. And I always find that there's a great connection between how cybersecurity could operate in relation to how inside counsel, for example, can operate, where the whole point of both professions, both roles in the company, is to enable progress safely, right?
Yeah.
Protect the organization. So both are very risk adverse. It seems organizations embrace the risk adverseness from the legal perspective. Everything passes through legal. Only if it gets the green check mark will that contract move forward and be signed, or whatever it is that's happening. And then on the other side of cyber, we tend to just be seen as the Department of No, and we're going to bypass you somehow, some way anyway. Shadow IT and all these different things. Right. So I find it interesting that there's a huge parallel there, but the organization doesn't view them the same. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was having a discussion actually a couple of weeks ago with some folks in-house at a couple of different organizations and in different roles. The CISO role versus privacy counsel, and some of these different roles that are having greater visibility now, just given what we're seeing in the market, particularly around cybersecurity and just the proliferation of attacks by threat actors. And it was the one thing that I thought was really interesting is that these groups, these organizations are, I think, communicating now probably more than ever, just given the way the landscape has changed. The CISO role isn't just about securing the environment. It's a business role, right? It has a place in the business. Because cybersecurity and security generally of the business, and of its information, of its commercially sensitive information, of its trade secrets, all those things have a place in how the business operates overall. And so I thought that was interesting, at least in some of those conversations. Where these organizations are evolving in terms of how they're communicating internally, and understanding the need to have sort of closer ties within the organization to various groups that perhaps, 2 years ago or a year ago or 5 years ago, maybe wouldn't have been having those conversations as frequently.
I was included in the fun activities of some discovery many years ago, where a company I was working for was claimed to have been infringing on some IP. Not uncommon, of course. That process can be a lot of fun. A lot of people involved. Bring cybersecurity into the mix, where we have privacy regulations, we have SEC reporting, we have customer notifications, and a lot of that also has to probably, one, be ready for potential litigation, but then also involve legal to ensure that the right things are said at the right time to the right folks, and not to others where it shouldn't be, and that kind of thing. And I hear a lot of stories about including legal early on in the case of a breach to, again, protect the organization to move through that process quickly. So what are your right of boom, the role of legal and maybe the connection there where discovery is much more than it used to be, and legal is much more involved in cybersecurity where it probably wasn't before either.
Right. I mean, I think legal is much more involved. It's not, an incident isn't a security issue only, right? It's not only a legal issue. It's a business issue, right? Because there's lots of cost and implications when you have a data incident. The IT department and the CISO might be charged with the technical piece and getting remediation and bringing in vendors to help with that, and ultimately limiting the amount of business interruption. But there are the privacy aspects, the notification obligations to not only to individuals whose data might be implicated in an incident, but your clients. You may have contractual obligations to a lot of your clients once you've had an incident. And then there's even downstream implications. We're seeing a lot more class actions associated with data incidents, right? So all of these things, it's a business issue at this point for most organizations. And I think because of that, more groups are getting involved. Because of the realization of that, I think more groups are getting involved in the decision-making process. Very early on, even when, before our organization gets involved in some of these matters, there's absolutely, outside counsel coming in to oversee the work that's happening specific to when there is an incident. And really it's around protecting the attorney-client privilege around this work. So we're not just seeing in-house counsel be more involved, but outside counsel is getting involved to make sure those protections are in place when there is sort of some of the downstream ramifications following an attack.
So thinking of these and going back to the early adopter, the one in the middle, and the slow one, when we look at the fact that at this point, and you kind of said that every business is a technology business, every business is possibly a target for an attack. The culture of not jumping on the technology wagon and putting cybersecurity on top of the list that you have to deal with as a law firm or a corporate counsel. It seems hard to resist. It's almost like I'm going to just stop working or just going to do something that is, I don't know, in the past nowadays. The culture, how can this law firm and corporate counsel help developing a culture of cybersecurity in a company if they are themselves not into that?
Yeah, it's a really challenging issue, I think, right? I think there's two things. One, everyone has to realize, you said it just a few minutes ago, everyone has to realize that no matter the industry, no matter the size of the organization, you are a potential target for a cyber attack, right? There is no getting around that. You are a medium-sized manufacturing company in the Midwest. You are a large hotel chain. You are a small family practitioner, healthcare practitioner. You are a medium-sized law firm, operating in several states. All of those organizations are potential targets for threat actors, and because at the end of the day, what they're most interested in, the threat actors is financial gain. And so, to the extent that there's financial gain in attacking any of those organizations, that's what they're going to look for. So, I think that's step number one, is just understanding that you are not immune to being a target. I think another interesting sort of piece of information is that when we talk about cybersecurity, it's really, in most organizations, a pretty small percentage of their IT budget. right? Which I think is really important for people to know. I've seen figures between 5 and maybe 10%. And this is, protecting your organization from, outsider threats that could really have a potentially significant monetary impact to your business. And so that's a pretty, that's a relatively small percentage. And so I think because of, technology, and that really is focused a lot, that 4 to 10% is focused heavily on technology, right? How can we put technology in place to protect our organization? And because of that, that's where I feel, from my perspective, this idea that you have to have a culture as an organization that respects the threats from cybersecurity threats, and your employee base is eyes wide open to these threats. There's this talk of the human firewall, right? No matter how many, how much technology you have in place, many of the incidents still require, have a human component. I think the last figure I saw recently was about 80% of incidents have a human component to enabling the threat actor into the system, sort of, and as the initial sort of jumping off point to the incident. And so I think those, understanding what your organization's able to do from a technology standpoint, understanding the level of threats in the market and how powerful, knowledgeable employees can be in being a deterrent and stopping threats. I think those ideas, can't be disputed, in the sense that, we have to have a culture where our employees are empowered to, raise their hand if they think there's an issue, are able to spot issues when they, something comes in that looks odd, and even those simple things, that there's power in that. And I think organizations, I think they're starting to understand that and see that more and more. But I think it's something that we just can't ignore.
So we're talking about the human here, and I know at Legal Week, as with most things, anywhere you travel connected to technology, there's a buzzword, technology. You can't avoid AI. So when you're talking about the human, I look at this technology, generative AI in particular, taking the smart things we do as humans and replicating it at scale, right? So what are you seeing in terms of Gen AI and large language models, in terms of opportunity, but also awareness and readiness to move forward safely, as the goal is for both legal and cybersecurity folks?
Yeah, I think, from a cybersecurity standpoint, I'll just start there and then kind of go into sort of the landscape generally. I think there's, we're seeing organizations leverage AI to bolster the protection of their organization, right? So from the inside, perhaps you have a team of 3 and you can leverage particular AI that's focused on in the cybersecurity space. Perhaps that allows you to just be, protect your organization just a little bit more using that technology. But on the flip side of that, we're seeing, threat actors leverage all sorts of AI to, I think, make their attacks perhaps more believable. And then not only, not just talking about, the emails that come in that, perhaps now are cleaner than they may have used to be when a phishing email came through, but also leveraging, technology that allows you to spoof a number, or the idea that you can now, get on a video call and perhaps fool someone using the image of a representative of their organization, so that you're trying to do that second layer of authentication when something, you're trying to do that right thing as you get the call from your CFO, hey, we need to make this wire transfer. Okay, let me hop on a Zoom call with my CFO and make sure everything is on the up and up. And suddenly someone's, layering additional technology on top to, spoof the CFO and, do that secondary authentication in a way that, sort of circumvents everything that people think they know about, about cyber attacks. So I think that piece is probably has people nervous. I think it's and is going to be a challenge, I think, going forward. I think, AI and generative AI, large language models, I think there's two ways people can go with these. I think there's leveraging models that already exist in the cloud. And I think there's obviously, there's some concern about what you're sending into the cloud as it relates to the data, even if it's tokenized. Is it anonymized? What am I really giving to the large language model? And, is that information going to be accessible in other ways? So I think that's a massive concern, right? Do I want to try to train a large language model and put my trade secret information, into the cloud in some way that might be accessible, to other users? I think there's lots of back and forth about that, and I'm sure that there, the safeguards in place to prevent that, but I think it's still a concern people have as they learn about the technology and how it works and whether they're comfortable. And then the other piece of that is, private large language models, trying to bring that technology in-house, maybe for purpose-built use cases. But there's obviously a huge expense with that. The processors that are required to do this are pretty significant. And you need a lot of data to train on to really get the benefits of these large language models. So I think there's a little bit of tug, in terms of data protection, but also wanting to leverage the technology that exists, and at the same time trying to figure out, what this means for sensitive data, commercially sensitive data, personal sensitive data. If you are sending it into a cloud environment that's going to use that data to learn and train for other types of purposes.
Yeah, and I can see a scenario where I'm using a prompt to play out my case trial, where I'm loading up all my stuff and I'm saying, all right, so assuming the opposing counsel comes at me with this, how likely or how well does my case stand up against? I can see some really cool things, but then of course the exposure of that data, if it's not private, it can be dramatic.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think we also see, that where, the outputs may not be 100% reliable, right? And so I think with anything, and particularly in the legal space, you're not going to get rid of the human component of verifying the information, right? Of taking that additional step of making sure what the output is, one, is what you want, is what you're looking for, but two, is accurate. And AI might help you get there faster in terms of maybe, pulling a brief together or doing some deposition prep or those types of things. But there still has to be that human element of, okay, this is what you're giving me, but let me validate this, particularly if you're, submitting something to a court, or you're going to be, asking questions in trial or in deposition. You want to make sure that you've crossed those I's and dotted those T's to make sure you're comfortable with the output.
And what, it blows my mind when I have these conversations, any application really of generative AI, is the fact that even when you don't use generative AI, even when there wasn't generative AI, you said somebody, do a research, you're just going to get the research and take it as is. Don't you want to cross-check that if it's that important? Maybe at least a couple of sets of eyes and a double, research that you're going to do just to be sure that it's right. And all of a sudden, we just want that easy button that magically everything is perfect. And that's probably the biggest downfall of, but I'm getting philosophical here.
I think it's really important, right? I think that's with any technology. At first, I tend to be like, personally, I I like technology. I think it has the opportunity to improve how we do things both in business and our everyday life, but you have to come into it with a little bit of skepticism, right? Without that skepticism, I think, you're just setting yourself up to be disappointed, or setting yourself up to be in a position where you've relied on it so heavily and it lets you down. And not just let you down, but in a pretty significant way, whether it's your business because you've leveraged a technology that, in a way that it was not intended, or you haven't cross-checked it and you submit a brief in a case, and suddenly there's some pretty significant downstream consequences, either as an attorney or from the courts or from your clients or from both. I just think you have to have a healthy level of skepticism and curiosity to make sure that that when you're using it in the right way. And I think it builds over time, at least for me. I think for a lot of people, right? You get more comfortable with how the tool works. You start using it for more and more things, but it's a gradual process. It's an incremental process, and I think that's okay from my standpoint. I don't think there's an issue with that, and I think it makes sense for a lot of businesses, particularly those that are more conservative in adopting technology.
Yeah, curious skepticism. I love that. As we wrap here, James, I want to connect a few dots. You talked about this being a business issue. We've talked about embracing technology, but not at the expense of keeping the human involved. And for me, this ultimately comes down to the culture we talked about, the team that we have in place, the technology that we're leveraging, and the smarts, the insights of what's going on, and all that becomes the operations. So how does what you and your team do at Consilio fit into legal teams within an organization, outside counsel, firms that are partnering together? How do you help different organizations embrace technology safely, do the discovery work, protect their data, handle incidents, all the things you do to kind of fit into this picture so that they can move forward and embrace technology in a safe way?
Yeah, I think Consilio has always been, a technology forward-leaning organization. I think we particularly, we're a legal technology service provider, and we understand the importance of technology in helping our clients. And so, I can remember, probably 15 years ago or 12 years ago, as we looked at, conceptual analytics as ways to drive, efficiencies in our workflows, and technology-assisted review was in its infancy. And we leaned into that, I think we leaned into it in a very, a smart way, a healthy way, with maybe curious skepticism, if you will, that, we want to use this technology, but we want to make sure we're using it the right way, and our clients are comfortable with how we're using it. And I think that trend is still continuing. I think even with AI, look, we recognize that our clients are very interested in this, but they have a lot of questions. And we want to be a resource for them in terms of, how we see it working, not only today, but, potentially down the road. And even on the work that my team does, we're vetting, we're always vetting new technology. We brought new technology in, I think, to enable our process. But I think we take the approach that there's always a human at the wheel, right? And there's always someone there that, understands the process, understands the technology and the tools that are leveraging that technology. And we're not simply sort of just relying on whatever the tool tells us, that we're putting processes in place to have a comfort level with that. So I saw that way back when we started technology assisted review, and I've seen that as we've adopted various types of technology over the years, and we're seeing that now. I think with the adoption of generative AI for sure.
I love it. Well, James, it's been great chatting with you. I appreciate you sharing your insights and giving us a view into the state of cyber and the culture in legal, and of course as well what you and your team do at Consilio to help folks deal with some of the challenges they have with leveraging technology to manage their legal processes, and it's all about connecting the human to the tech, keeping those two together in the context of the business. That's the most important thing, right? If we're doing it for the sake of doing it, then we're missing the mark. Thanks everybody for listening to this episode. Of course, any resources James and team want to share, we'll include those in the show notes, and encourage you to connect with James and the Consilio team. And appreciate it, James. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate the time.